What I'm going to share with you in this video is something that very few clothing brands ever understand. So if you were lucky enough to stumble across this video, that's absolutely sick for you. I'm going to show you how you can run Facebook ads, run TikTok ads, run Instagram ads for your brand and still be profitable. This is a problem that so many clothing brands run into. They try and run ads for their brand and they can't do it in a profitable way. They don't understand why they can't be profitable with their brand. And I have a formula here that I'm going to break down for you from start to finish that explains to you how you can calculate how much money you actually have to spend on ads and still be profitable for your brand. So you're going to learn a ton along the way, and this is going to be absolutely sick for you. Now, before I change your life with the mad science behind me, I want to let you know that Apparel Success is sponsored by my buds over at BrandCrowd. BrandCrowd's a logo maker tool. You type in the name of the logo that you want, smack that enter button, thousands of logos will come up. You choose the logo that you like, then you can edit, refine that logo as long as you want for free until it's perfect. This is a Hundo P design I made for my own clothing brand using BrandCrowd. If you're interested, head over to brandcrowd.com/apparel success and you can get up to 66% off at checkout. All right, so the first thing that you need to understand in order to determine how much money you have to spend on ads and still be profitable is you need to understand net profit. Now, this is where most clothing brands make a giant mistake. Most clothing brands think that they're profitable, but it's because they're calculating their gross profit and they're not actually looking at their net profit. The gross profit is the total revenue minus the total cost of goods sold. So what this looks like is maybe you make a t-shirt for $5, you sell it for $20, and you think, oh, I'm making $15. My brand is super profitable. That's not always the case because you haven't calculated all the expenses that go into your brand. And this is where a lot of brands are actually losing a ton of money and they have absolutely no idea because they're not calculating their net profit. Your net profit is your true profit for your brand. Your total revenue minus your total expenses. So your expenses would be things like your cost of goods sold, plus your operational expenses, plus your supplies, plus your taxes, plus your account, your bookkeeper, whatever else you're spending money on, your shipping, all of the expenses for your brand. And you should be calculating this every month, every year for your brand, and just have a good idea every single month if you're in a net profit or if you're in a net loss. So just for the purpose of this video here, let's use this example and assume that last year in 2023, we're in 2024 right now, you did $10,000 in total revenue and you had $6,000 total expenses, so you minus that, you'd have a net profit of $4,000. The next part that you absolutely need to know in order to calculate how much money you have to spend on ads is your net profit margin. Your net profit margin is the percentage of the total revenue that you're actually keeping as profit. And we calculate this by taking your net profit, dividing it by your total revenue, and multiplying it by 100. And this is done over usually a year time period. So for 2023, if you did this, you would know what your net profit margin was for the year of 2023. And just as an example, let's use the same numbers from up here. So your net profit, $4,000 in 2023, divided by your total revenue, $10,000, times 100 equals a 40% net profit margin. All right, let's get a little breather in here because you need to understand this next part. It's so important. The next thing that you need to understand is this AOV. This is your average order value. For every order that comes in on your website, what's the average amount that each customer is spending per order? And you can find this out if you're in Shopify or if you're in Wix. It's like in your analytics. It'll just say whatever time period you set it for, what your average order value is. And 80 is a pretty good average order value, pretty common to be around $80. And then the next thing that you need to understand is this CPP here. This is your cost per purchase. You find a cost per purchase inside of Facebook ads, inside of TikTok ads, when you're running ads. And it's basically how much money you have to spend on ads in order to get each purchase on your website, in order to get an order on your website. And the average CPP, the average cost per purchase, is between $30 to $50 when running ads on TikTok ads, Facebook ads for your brand. I know that seems kind of high, but that's just the amount that it usually costs in order to generate orders in the moment. So for the purpose of explaining this in this video, I'm going to use a relatively common average order value of 80 and a relatively common cost per purchase of $40. What we're trying to determine is if your average order value is $80 and your average cost per purchase is $40, how much money are you actually making, and how do we determine where you get into a loss and where you're still profitable for your brand? And so there's this formula here to determine the percentage of each order that you receive that you actually had to spend on ads in order to get that order. And so what I've done here is you just take your cost per purchase, so if it's 40, if it's 35, whatever it is, you divide it by your average order value. This is the average order that you're receiving, and you multiply it by 100. And this would be the percentage of each order that you're receiving that you had to spend on ads. Like the percentage of the total revenue that you got that you had to spend on ads. If you're a little bit confused right now, this is where it's all going to come together for you. Let's say that your average order value is $80 on your site and your net profit margin is 40%. That means that when you get an average order on your site of $80, you're going to make 40% profit on that order, which is $32. Okay, $32. Okay, let's say that this is before you spent any money on ads. You were net profiting $32. Well, once you start to spend money on ads to acquire this $80 order, you're going to be giving 50% of that order is ad spend, which would be $40. 50%, half of 80 is going into ads to acquire that order. So you have to minus that. It's 32 minus 40, so you're actually minus $8 in acquiring that order, in getting that order, if your cost per purchase is $40 in ads and if your average order value is $80. And this right here is the biggest issue with most clothing brands running ads. They're trying to run ads and they just can't do it profitably because it just costs a certain amount of money to get your ads out there. It's really hard to test and get your CPP low enough that you're actually profitable on every single order. So I highly recommend calculating all this for your own brand. And what I'm about to show you is actually the solution to this. My solution to this, how I've done this for my own clothing brand, and how I believe that most clothing brands need to do it in order to be profitable. And by the way, before I show you the solution here, the average net profit margin in apparel is 10%. Most people think that these big brands are netting like 60% or 50% or even 40% in net profit. But brands like Zara, brands like H&M, actually have like a 3 or 4% net profit margin. And it's because they might have a good gross profit. They might be making their t-shirts for $1 and selling them for like 70 or something like that. But after all of the marketing, after all the endorsements, after all the commercials, after their giant team and paying everybody, the net profit becomes really, really thin. And that's just the nature of the industry. So I want to show you the solution to this right now. In another scenario, let's imagine that instead of $10,000 in revenue, you had $10,000 in revenue coming in ads, and you also had another $10,000 in revenue coming in from organic marketing. This is like your organic efforts on TikTok, on Instagram, posting on Reels, driving sales that way. And so you actually have a total revenue now of $20,000 because you were spending $10,000 on ads, and you also had $10,000 that you were getting from just your time, your energy, and your own creativity. Well, if you have $20,000 in total revenue, then now you've got a completely different formula here. $20,000 in total revenue minus $6,000 in expenses equals $14,000 in net profit. If you do the same calculation here to determine your net profit margin, it's a 70% net profit margin. And just as a rule of thumb, this number here needs to always be lower than your net profit margin in order to cover the difference. And that's why it works here, is because, let's do the math, 70% of 80 is 56, right? So you'd get $56 in profit from an $80 average order value, minus 40, if that's what your cost per purchase is, and you'd still be profiting $16. So you'd actually be in the plus here, $16 if you were separating it and not just spending all of your money on ads, and that was the only way to acquire customers. That's the biggest issue with most of these clothing brands, is that the only way to acquire customers is through ads, and the math becomes so hard to figure out, so hard to stay profitable. And I also realized, in this scenario, you may say, yeah, I lost $8 in the moment, but what about lifetime value? Maybe if I email market them in the future, they'll place another order. And sure, you could look at it like that, but if you're bootstrapping your clothing brand and if you're a startup, you need that money coming in from your orders to reinvest in more inventory, to reinvest in more ads, and to keep growing this thing. You can't be losing money transactionally in the moment. And so the only way to really do this as a startup is to make money profitably on the ads that you're running. And so I really hope that helps you understand why so many clothing brands are struggling and why so many clothing brands can't run ads profitably. If you're starting up a clothing brand or you're already running one, you've got to check out the Apparel Success Mastermind. It's a monthly subscription where you get direct access to me, access to a community of other clothing brand owners, access to exclusive live streams that we do every month, and all of my courses are in there. You can check it out at apparelsuccessmastermind.com, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.